Good morning, everyone. I'm Sotadeology. In today's video, we're going to dissect Sotadeology Lecture 17, the underlying information of time. So we want to dissect the underlying structure of time. We want to see how information can actually be transmitted via time trajectory. Now, by default, time is instant. It is only when time is in relativistic scaling with energy that it becomes continuous. Then by default, energy is infinite, only when energy is in relativistic scaling to time that it becomes discrete. So we're going to go so deeply into the fabric of the universe in order to unravel this mystery. So we're going to see even how we get conscious, and then we get to see how we're able to have convergence of information that is useful for human life to exist in the universe. You understand? And then we look at the what I call combinatorial inflation problem, or probably more or less like the um let me should I don't know, maybe I should call it bias attachment to the real signal. So basically, we're going to go deeply into this for us to really understand this, concept quite all right. I'll be using some diagrams to drive my point home. So now let's dive into it. I'm going to use this diagram that I have right here. And now when you look at the diagram, this is time energy wave model. Now we can see the trajectory of time in blue curvature, while the energy trajectory is the red curvature. When we look at the formula of everything, which is what we have here, the TDM actually stands for the curvature of time to curvature of energy, and equal to capital UN plus 4M. That is the linear solution that we have as equilateral triangle. So by applying this particular formula, we're going to actually get the emergence of this equilateral triangle, and at the present phase, which is the present phase of time peregrination, or at event horizon, we're going to have a kind of instant trajectory that we actually go beyond the constraint of time energy model of substrate dimensioning to higher dimension to get connected to the positron of that higher dimension, and then instantly flip that electron to become a positron. And by having a positron at higher dimension, we can then have the instantiation of electron at the substrate dimension. Now the integration of that positron of higher dimension into the substrate dimension will allow us to have momentum towards the core singularity of black hole. And so we can then have the inversely related equilateral triangle to this equilateral triangle of cosmological space. So now, merely looking at this diagram, you can get to see that we have a convergence right up here, which is known as classical arbitrary suspension. And there is another one here, which is known as quantum arbitrary suspension. Now, this suspension is highly needed for us to have latency in time peregrination so as to have the feasibility of the past, the present, and the future. Now, where we now have solution, or probably where we have that conscious feeling that we normally experience, is at this present phase of time peregrination, because it is more or less like when you are on Earth, you will not be able to see the full reality of Earth. You might think that Earth is flat, but when you travel away from the Earth to a certain distance, then you see the full picture of Earth, and then you know that Earth is not flat. But then if you move away from Earth such that Earth becomes a tiny point, then we can actually liken that situation to classical mechanics and quantum mechanics. So the tiny point of Earth is the quantum mechanics, while where the person is in relativistic scaling to that Earth is the classical mechanics. So now we can't actually get, the full picture of Earth in such shape. But then if you move away such that the Earth now disappears, from that person's viewing perspective, then we can call that scenario complex system. Now, for you to now relocate, for you to now reconnect to that Earth that you can't observe, you need to travel instantly. Because when you look at, as you are moving away from the Earth, you see that the Earth as well is moving away from you. So you are moving away, the Earth is moving away. Now, if you are approaching the Earth, that Earth, wherever it is, too, will be moving towards you. That is the relativity. So now, the only means by which you can get the exact position of that missing Earth from your perspective is to travel instantly. And that is why it is ideal for us to have this instant trajectory of time in order to locate the exact position of that higher dimensions electron that will be instantly flipped to positron. And what we have there is known as objective consciousness. Objective consciousness, we have it right from the higher dimension. And when it is injected into the substrate dimension, such that we have momentum towards the core singularity of the black hole, that is then we can have subjective consciousness. Because the subjective consciousness, we just have to relocate this real classical mass to this point where we have the intersection of time trajectory to energy trajectory. And so we're going to have suspension right inside the core singularity of the black hole, which is synonymous to having it to be infinite. So when you have infinite phenomenon at quantum level, then you have real or you have genuine contact at classical level. Now, when you look at this place, before we could have real contact with electron of the higher dimension, we have to go beyond the time energy constraint, because by applying formula of everything, we realize that electron supposed to be right here, which is the nucleus of the future. But then we realize that electron is not defined, not until when we get connected to the electron of the higher dimension, and then it is flipped to positron, and that is when we now have electron being instantiated here. So what that is telling us is that electron, the inverse of electron, is what must initially be connected to before we can have that electron being defined. So it is more or less like having a point in the space. That point, if it is not being relativistically connected or related to any other point, you cannot define it. You cannot actually say this is what this point is. But the moment you have a point that is relativistically connected to it, then you can say this is the past point, while this is the future point. So now we realize that before the electron of that substrate dimension can be defined, there must be a connection to the electron of the higher dimension that will be instantly flipped to positron. And then once we have that, the information will be transmitted back to the classical mechanics. And that is the conscious feeling that we often have. So this conscious feeling that we have is objective consciousness, simply because it's able to locate the real location of the higher dimensions electron, and then the real emergence or the real instantiation of the substrate electron that as we have it being transmitted instantly, because now the transmission is in form of information. Even though we have genuine contact at complex level, we can see that at classical level here, we have suspension to where the classical mass should be. So it's more or less like we have this phenomenon to be infinite, while this is, genuine contact. But then the instant transmission of information from here back to this is the ideal thing that emulates that instancy of time, and that is what we actually need. So at this vertical trajectory, we have instant transmission of information. So now it is not, because when you look at the way time is applicable to classical mechanics and relativistic to quantum mechanics, we are going to really have this divergence. And as you can see, we have the divergence by having trajectory, the linear trajectory of time being inversely related to linear trajectory of energy. And the only way we can actually unite classical mechanics to quantum mechanics is to bridge the gap. So by default, we know that whenever we have genuine contact at complex level, we're going to have suspended phenomenon at classical level. So now that is actually being solved by instant transmission of information. And that is why today's topic is the underlying information of time. So we want to see how information is being transmitted instantly to give us that global now effect. Einstein said that it is not possible to have, relativity of simultaneity. You understand? Because at classical level, we have more or less like a localized situation, but at quantum level, we have a kind of global situation. So to merge that, information transmission will now be, the one to bridge that gap for us. So basically, you have the idea of it. So by applying this particular formula of everything, we have this whole thing, and even all the numbers as we have them, it's as a result of application of this formula of everything. Okay, so now there is one key thing that I need you to understand. Before the real entity can actually be defined, we must initially get connected to the inverse copy of it. And that is why I want us to look at the text that I have right here. Look at this. I initially wrote this poem before embarking on this particular research. So now, look at what we have. Unseen things are valuable than seen things. Things seen than valuable are things unseen. Now, when you look at this, you can see that inverse of it, which is things seen. So now, when you look at this, this is just an extract from my poem. Well, I think, yes, the poem is Sotadeology. So it's a palindromic poem, a kind of poem that you can read from left to right and then read it from right to left. So now, the initial one is unseen things are valuable than seen things. And then we now flip it from that right to left to have things seen than valuable are things unseen. Now, when you look at that extract, you can actually see that the inverse part of that original one is more powerful. So it's more or less like male and female combination. Male and female combinations, the way I see it. So now, but when the thing is, they are not the same. Even though when it is being flipped, they are still not the same. And that is why the inverse of anything you have is not the same as the original. when you view yourself in a mirror, the flipped version of you right inside the mirror can never be the same thing as your real self. So that is that. Once you get to know that, then you can really understand this concept quite all right. So because of that latency in time peregrination, that is why we don't usually have it to be equal. So if we have it to be equal, it means that there will be stoppage of momentum both at classical level and at quantum level, and that will disrupt or stop, the momentum mechanics of the whole universe. So it's either we have a slight stop at one side, then have a continuous momentum at the other side, or have a stopped momentum at other side, then have continuous momentum at this side. So that is the whole system. But now, the powerful underlying mechanics that we need to dissect is is information, how information is being transmitted. So now, even though we have that latency in time trajectory, by transmission of information, that gap is being closed. And so we could have what I call global now. So that is that. So now, I want us to look at this information structure as we have it here. Now, the one we have up here, this is digital information space structure. It is rigid because we have, chunks of spaces being assigned to combination of zeros and one, being assigned to combinations of zeros and one. So when any of these numbers is deleted, that space will still remain the way it is with its size. But now, let's look at what we have under, which is analog information space structure. This is the information space structure of time technology. Time technology is so flexible that the space structure can actually expand and contract to adequately accommodate data. So now, the thing now is, just as we must always have curvature of mass progression to the curvature of energy to have standing wave that will be projected into higher dimension for us to have emergence of positron and electron. That is the same way this information space structure is being developed. Now, before we can have an emergence of zero, we must have an inverse of it, which is imaginary number. Now, this imaginary number being zero, it is not the actual imaginary number. Imaginary number should just be, square root of -1. But basically, what I'm trying to portray here is that this imaginary number is the positron, while this real number is electron. But for positron, you have a state where positron is not being defined, and you have a state where it is being defined. So by having it to be zero, it means that both positron and electron are not defined. So now there is this analog part, which is this curved trajectory. Now we have it plying the positive side because the emergence is zero. So the curvature can assume any number. It could be 0.2, 0.1, 0.5, all through to 1, from 0 all through to 1, then down from 1 to all through to 0. So we then have it to be this. But then look at this. If we have it to be in this form, you know that a collateral triangle is being flipped. Once the equilateral triangle is being flipped as what we have here, then the trajectory of the curvature will be around the negative side. It could assume any number, and so we have here we have the emergence of electron and then emergence of positron. So we can then take the number, we have this to be digital. All these emergencies, they are digital numbers. So the only analog, where we have analog numbers, is where we, have this curvature, the positive curvature, the negative curvature. So now right at the middle, we have relativity. You can see that the red horizontal line is being inversely related to the black horizontal line. So that is that about that. So now that structure is, we can see that that structure is more ideal than the conventional number structure. So then we know that once we have the emergence of these numbers as we're supposed to have them, we can map them onto electrical signal to really have, the ideal number for computation. So now when you look down here, to be informed is to be conscious. And I explained that in that time energy wave model earlier. So now imaginary number is an inverse determinant of what real number to get in analog information system. So the inverse relationship of time's instancy to energy's infinity is the flexible structure of space to adequately accommodate mass work, from 0 all through to 1. Then we're going to have optimization of space usage because the structure can actually expand and contract to accommodate data. So now we have this dynamic mass worth to flexible space defines a system ideal for growing universe. So basically that is that. In time technology, we have what is known as quaternary, which is using 4 number plus 0, -0, +1, -1. So quaternary, we actually model the reality of the universe the way it ought to be. So that is that. So by having this time technology, we can adequately solve, the inherent noise in quantum entanglement. So we can solve the problem of quantum computing to have this. So this time technology will actually serve as a part in this era of, it will serve as, innovation that can actually boost demand side of market in this era of AI. AI is designed to actually boost the supply side to increase GDP. You understand? So basically that is that. So now let's look at how formula of everything is derived. It's a powerful formula. And so it is, when you look at its structure, it is similar to the learning equation of AI. But the difference is that AI has n sub 1 as neuron and then equal to m sub 1 times x. X is the input. So m sub 1 is the weight. So you regulate weight you adjust weight to effectively arrive at close approximation to reality. And then we have plus b sub 1, which is the bias value. But when you look at this one, we have dt dm equal to capital Um plus 4m. So it is somehow similar, but with additional m right here instead of just b sub 1 as we have for the bias. So this formula is being derived by using chain rule of differential calculus. And you know that aside from the learning equation of AI, after you have, the normalized output, then you are going to have back propagation, which will be derived by using chain rule. So that back propagation will just, narrow down the difference between the ideal output, what the ideal output should be, and then the biased output, such that you have close approximation or close proximity to reality. So now, when you look at this, capital U is the constant value of the universe, which is 2.5 times 10 raised to power 39. Then we have capital UM to be strong conveying force, then 4M to be weak conveying force, and this 4 is time conveying value. Brief derivation of formula of everything. By using chain rule, we have this. And so if we say T should be E square, for T is the function of E, where E is M raised power 2 plus 1. Therefore, E can then be function of GM as well, which is, I will call this to be gravitational effect, while this is electromagnetic effect. So thus T equal to E raised to power 2 equal to, we open bracket square, inside it we have M square plus 1. Now to derive the T, the E, we have it to be 2E. To derive the E, the M, we have it to be 2M. By chain rule, it will be 2E times 2M. We have it to be 4EM. Now, the moment we substitute this E, this value, the moment we substitute this value for E, we're going to have this. And by having this, when we solve it further, we're going to have 4M squared plus 4M. The 4M squared is the strong nuclear force, while the 4M is weak nuclear force. So now we have started with the integration of, 4 fundamental forces of the universe. And so now, using 4EM of this particular placeholder as T equals to E squared, for T is the function of Fe, where E, we're now using the formula of Albert Einstein, which is E equal mc squared right here. So once we have that, for us to integrate this, then we solve it further. 4EM, then we have this. You can see that we have integrated the mc squared right there. And so everything all together, that is the integration of gravitational force. Why this 4 mc squared, this region, is integration of electromagnetic force. So now, when we now solve that further, we're going to have dt dm for these 274 m per, I think it's a meter or mile. This is just the speed of gravitational speed of sun, because sun is at the center of all other heavenly bodies, so they are going to be attracted to sun by the gravitational force of sun. So we're going to use this value instead of mass. In the place of mass, we're going to use this value, because we're still going to have our m in the formula, and so we can usually substitute mass worth of what we want to derive by in place of that m. So now we put this value 274, then this is the speed of light squared, and then when we solve that further, we're going to have this 2.5 times 10 raised to power 39 m plus 4m. So we can, this constant speed of the universe, we can substitute that with capital U, and so we have this to be the formula of everything. So that is that. Time technology is actually based on formula of everything, and it is actually based on formula of everything. And then the main thing I want you to understand is that the underlying transmission of information in time trajectory, that is the key unification as to emergence of global now. We know by relativity it is not so ideal to have global now when you are considering that relativistic relationship of classical mechanics to quantum mechanics. But with that instant transmission of information right from the complex level back to the classical mechanics, we can then have that global now. You understand? So that is the powerful effect of information. Then another thing you need to know is that before we can actually have a kind of arrangement combination of ideal ideal information that can actually function. We must actually have that instant trajectory right from the classical all through the quantum mechanics to the complex system to get the positron of that higher dimension, and by locating that we can have the instantiation of the electron of the substrate dimension, and with that we can then locate the location of the classical mass. That is the whole idea. That is how universe is actually using instant trajectory of time to quickly arrange information in such a way that that information can actually, be useful. So basically you can see that that is more powerful than than the large language model, more powerful than large language model. So once you get the inverse of what the subcomponent is, then you can get, once you get the location rather, once you get the location of the inverse of what the subcomponent of yourself is, then you can get to fully realize who you are genuinely. That is the whole idea. So that is that. I believe the video is quite informative and insightful. If you enjoy the video, make sure you share it with your friends. I want it to travel as far as quick as possible. Then I'm going to share in the description links to my research publication so people can download it and work more on it. Then I want you to subscribe to this channel so that you can get the subsequent upload. God bless you. Thank you.